Alrighty, so let's continue. Now you're going to have the poll. So basically, remember we wanted to figure out, like what is the sign basically of these derivatives. So how would the change in income, how would the change in prices, all of these affect our basically consumption, optimal consumption. So that's what we wanted to know. But so here we said that if that derivative is positive, then we call these goods normal goods. If that derivative is negative, we call these goods inferior goods. And for these, for instance, sometimes you can also give the example of legumes. Okay, you know what they are? Baklagil. So they're chickpeas, chickpeas, nohut. Okay, so it's actually, so this is baklagil. So these are also considered inferior goods, right? Because when you have more money, you would get what? Meat, right? To get protein. So these are sources of protein. But when you have low levels of income, at some point you might, when your income increases, you might increase your chickpeas consumption. But then as your income gets higher and higher, you might start decreasing your chickpeas consumption, okay? So legumes, baklagillar, for instance, chickpeas, nohut. So white beans, what is this? Kuru fasulye, okay? Okay, so like stuff, all these other legumes, baklagillar you can think of, okay? So now, remember we figured this guy out. Now we're going to figure this guy out, okay? So what is this derivative? Okay, and when we figured this out, basically we wanted to know when there's a change in price, right? How would this affect our optimal consumption? So according to law of demand, we actually say that, of course, holding, remember in law of demand, the key phrase was holding everything else constant. When there's a change in price, right, how would the optimal consumption change? We know that it is mostly positive, but let's see, okay? So in which cases it's going to be, it's mostly negative, right? But let's see that in which cases it's going to be positive. We're going to call those goods, we're going to give them a special name, okay? Now, when you think of a change in price, the effect of a change of the price of the good on the consumption of that good, for our friends who have taken ECON 101, remember we were talking about, so these this is actually students hate the most, these concepts. Remember there were two effects going on. Do you remember what were they? They were income effect and substitution effect, right? Now we're going to see them, but you'll see that now we know, like we can solve everything. So you're going to see that you can actually solve the utility maximization problem, get those effects and such. But, and then we're going to, again, as usual, I'll try to give you on a graph the intuition of it as well. So that's why I said that it's going to be the, probably the ugliest graph that we're going to, draw in this course. So now let's do this, changes in price. Now, when there's a change in price of the good, so there are actually, as we said, that there are two things going on. So why would you, suppose this is negative, right? As you guys said that, when price of a good increases, you decrease less of that good. Why? Why? So why do you think, for instance, when price of that good increases, you would like to decrease your consumption of that good? Now the good is, well, remember what we say, relatively more expensive compared to before, right? So remember, we were always, what was our optimality condition? We were saying that MRS should be equal to PX over PY, right? So you see that when there's a change in income, do you see a change in the, like for instance, if you look at the budget lines, do you see any change in the slope? No, right? The slope stays the same. But when there's a change in price, both the slope would change, and you know, because you would like to, one good is relatively more expensive than the other, so you know, you want to set your substitution, the rate that you would like to substitute, to the new rate of substitution, right? And also there's actually another effect that both the slope is going to change, right? And also it's going to be the same intercept, or the intercept will change as well if you think of the budget constraint. So let's put y here, let's put x here. Suppose px increases to px prime, let's say. Then this budget line is, so this is going to I over px, right? I over py. So then how would this change? Px prime, suppose there's an increase in price. So this budget line would rotate, right? It's going to rotate, right? It's not going to be a parallel shift. It would shift inwards, right? So it's going to be something like this. I over px prime, right? So you see both the slope has changed, and also what else has changed? What was this? How did we call this area? We called it budget set, right? So we called it the budget set. So this is actually all these affordable points to you, right? So when there's a change in price, not only the slope changes, right, but also the set that you have is now smaller. So this is actually, you can think of it, so basically the amount of goods and services you can buy with the same level of income I is now less, right? So that's why you would feel richer or poorer. Poorer, right? So you see that they would, that's why they always think of it, that's why there are actually two effects. One, you're going to see that substitution effect. You guys told me that, oh, hocam, when price of good X increases, I would feel poorer, right? With the same amount of income. But even if I compensate you for this loss, okay, in real income, what we call the real income, okay? Suppose I make you go back to your original utility level, okay? You'll see that you would still want to substitute. So because X is now more expensive, okay? 4,000, suppose, let's say I have 4,000 Turkish liras in Ankara, okay? And suppose I have 4,000 Turkish liras in Istanbul. So my nominal income in both cities is the same, right? It's I. So, but where do you think you would feel richer? Why? Because it's cheaper, right? So you see that this is what so the real income, as you guys told me, right? Real income in Ankara is more, because with 4,000 Turkish liras, I can buy more goods and services, okay? So real income, sometimes it's called purchasing power, okay? Satın alma gücü, okay? So, or sometimes it's called like well-being. Sometimes it's also used interchangeably for utility, sort of. It means that, you know, where do you think you would be happier? Of course, happier might not be a good question. People might be happier in, I was born and raised in Ankara, so for some reason, I love this city more than Istanbul, but I think I'm one of the very few ones. But you know, like at least you would feel, suppose you like that both cities the same, right? So where would you feel happier? Definitely you would feel happier in Ankara, because your welfare, your living standards, your purchasing power, right, your well-being would be more in Ankara, okay? So basically in terms of real income, here it's higher. Real income is higher, okay? So you see, that's why you should always look at, whenever they give you, for instance, they're talking about, right, they're going to increase the minimum wage, right? So they're going to increase the minimum wage, but suppose they increase the minimum wage, but they put all sorts of other taxes, right? Do you think anything would change? No, right? So it's actually, remember what we said, that the demand function is homogeneous of degree 0 sort of thing. If they're going to increase the minimum wage and they're going to increase, you know, like indirectly the prices of all the other goods, nothing would change, right? And definitely here, if they, you know, like increase your, if they might not be, so they might increase the minimum wage, but you should look at, whether the well-being of people who are actually working at the minimum age is actually more now, right? So their welfare has improved, okay? So that we should check, okay? So definitely, so just keep this in your mind. So there's this difference between nominal income and real income. That's what a price change does. It decreases, if price of one good increases, it decreases your real income. Okay, so just keep this in your mind. So sometimes they might offer you some nominal increases in minimum wage, but make sure that, if all the price level stay the same and your income has an increase, then good, your well-being, right? So you would be better off. But indirectly also the prices and other taxes are also increasing, that in real terms, in terms of your purchasing power, nothing might change, or things might change, but very slightly, okay? So now, let's actually look at this. As I said, that there are actually two effects, income effect and substitution effect. So now let me draw them. So I think your book has the decrease in price, so I'm going to do the increase in price here so that you would have both cases, okay? So let's do it. Okay, this is hard. So now let's start, okay? So I'm going to put here y, I'm going to put here x. So I'm going to do an increase in px. Now my px prime is going to be greater than px, okay? So now this is going to be my budget constraint, okay? So what is this intercept? Remember we said if you spend all my income on good x, the maximum amount of x I'm going to get I over px, right? So this is going to be if I spend all my income I over py, right? So let's actually, and the slope is minus px over py, okay? And let's say that I have, okay, so one trick, don't make indifference curves too steep. So try to make them a little bit, or you'll cheat. Okay, later you'll just make them a little bit less steep, okay? So let's put it like this. Okay, so suppose this is actually the optimal amount. So let's call this x1 star, e1, y1 star, okay? And suppose this is the utility level. I'm going to put here u2 because the utility, right, when price of good x increases, obviously your utility, right, is going to fall, okay? Now, so this is basically the case. Now let's try to actually understand the income effect and the substitution effect, as I said. Now I'm going to introduce the decrease in price, the price change, okay? Now let's have this. Now I'm going to, as I said, that they introduce the price change. So it's going to, what's going to happen to the budget constraint when there's an increase in price of x? It's going to, you said rotate inwards or outwards? Inwards, right? So that's what we said. So let's actually make this guy rotate inwards. Let's say it's here, okay? So you see that when you draw the graph, it's important to keep track of what's going on. This is minus px prime over py, okay? And then, so let's actually have this. So let me try to have the optimal. So what is this point? For instance, this intercept, if you want to know. What is this intercept? Right, so it's I over px prime. You see, immediately you see that the amount of x, if you spend all your money on x, is now less, right? So obviously your real income, your purchasing power has decreased, okay? And then now let's actually have this guy here. U1, I'm going to, so this is going to be my new optimal bundle. So let's actually have this, call this E2. So this is x2 star, y2 star, okay? Now I haven't done, like much. This was my initial point before the price increase. When price increase, now I have my new budget line and I'm on my new utility level, okay? Now, this is actually what we would do is this, as I said that there are two effects, substitution effect, okay, and income effect. Now, in order to get the substitution effect, here's what we're going to do. We say that, okay, we know that when there's an increase in price, the X is relatively more expensive, of course, and this guy feels poorer or richer. Poorer, right? Because now the income, X has increased, right? So price of X has increased, so the real income of this consumer is less. So this consumer feels poorer. Suppose this guy was on U2 before, right? Suppose I give this guy enough income, I compensate this guy for this loss in real income, such that the guy is still on his old indifference curve. Okay, suppose I do this. How can I do that? I'm going to shift, but which budget line? The second one, right? The green one, I'm going to shift this guy because I know that now there are the new prices. I cannot change that. But suppose I give the guy some money so that he would be on the same indifference curve, okay? He would be on the same utility level. He didn't feel this decrease in his well-being, okay? So then I'm going to have this guy parallel to this, and it's going to be, as I said, my y-axis is never. So this is basically, okay, so this is the hard part. So this has to be parallel and it has to touch this guy, okay? Okay, I'm happy now, okay? So you see that it's touching, so I'm going to call this point here B. As I said that if these things, you cannot do it, then you can just play with the curvature of these indifference curves, okay? Cheat. So that's what I do too, okay? Otherwise it's very hard to draw it on the board, trust me. So it's, and I don't like to use PowerPoints and, slides, because if you suffer, as I told you, I should suffer on the board as well, okay? But I think it's pretty helpful that now once you draw it, learn how to draw it, it's good, okay? It tells you a lot. So you see that this is exactly what you guys told me. Hocam, if you want the guy to stay at his old utility level, what you should do with the new prices, right? The slope of this guy is what? Minus px prime divided by py, right? With the new prices, you should make this guy, you should be tangent to the old indifference curve, right? And then you would compensate the guy for the loss in real income, right? And then, but you see what happens. And remember, this is what we learned. In order to give the guy, when there's a change in price, remember I told you in the expenditure function how much money you should give that person, right? And remember we discussed this, whether you should make the old bundle available or you can give the guy a little bit less. What was the case? Right? You guys remember you didn't have to give 1 Turkish lira. To the guy you can give a little bit less because the guy was reallocating stuff as well. So you don't have to make the original, you see, to be on the same utility level with the new prices, I don't have to make the original bundle available, right? I can give a little bit of less income, right? So these are all the stuff that we learned, which was preparing us for these moments, okay? So basically this is the case. You see that now, let's actually have a look at this guy. So I'm going to call this XB, and I'm going to call this YB, okay? So this movement from E1 to B, is called substitution effect. Okay, so this guy here. Now I know that it's all really crowded, but let's do it like this. So you remember initially I was here. I had x1 star. So the movement from x1 star to xb, this part, okay, this is called substitution effect, which means that even if I compensate this guy for the loss in the real income, the guy is still substituting, okay, you see? Because the price, remember, optimality condition requires that it should be on the budget line and MRS should be equal to PX over PY. So the guy is going to re-optimize, right? He's going to set PX over PY. So the MRS, because going to set his MRS equal to PX over PY. Since PX over PY has changed, now we're going to be at this point, okay? So this is called substitution effect. Now, and you know that this red line, sometimes it's called, like, did you watch the movie, you know, like A Beautiful Mind, right, with John Nash? Remember that he had an imaginary friend which did not exist at all. So sometimes this red line is called imaginary budget line, okay, because such line doesn't exist. We use it in order to, you know, like basically decompose the effect into two, into substitution effect and into income effect, okay? So sometimes that's why this is called the imaginary budget line. So this is the substitution effect. Even if I told the guy, don't worry, I'm not going to let your income fall, real income fall. I'm going to compensate for you for that. Even in that case, the guy would like to move from E1 to B, right, when there's a change in price. And then, but of course, such good things, they don't happen in real life. When the price increase, you have to suffer the real income loss as well. And then we said that, oh, now I'm going to get that money back, okay? So when I get that money back, this time it's going to be the pure income effect, right, the real income. Because from here to here, PX over PY ratio doesn't change, right? The only thing that changes is income. So in order to decompose the effect of price, this is what we do, okay? So this, from the movement from x1 to xb or e1 to b, is called substitution effect. And the movement from b to e2 or xb to x2 is called the income effect, okay? So this is basically the case. So now let me write this. Is this clear? This is very important. Okay, don't worry, I'm not going to erase this. It's a beautiful picture, right? So it's so basically, but it's very important. Did you understand how we decompose the? So this is something that we introduced, right? So this doesn't exist in the book, right? So that's why it's an imaginary budget line. It doesn't exist, but it helps us to decompose these two effects, okay? So let me write this. So substitution effect, but what's happening here is that I forgot to tell you one thing. So when price of X increases, you guys told me, richer or poorer? Poorer. So when you feel poorer, it feels as if your income has decreased, right? You're going to increase or decrease the consumption of X. But you have to tell me if it's a normal good, right? If it's a given good, then income effect is not going to be like this. But you're going to see if it's an inferior good, if it's not a normal good, then the income effect is not going to be like this, but it's going to be in the other direction, okay? So now, here, that's why you have to mention all the time whether it's a normal good or an inferior good, okay? For normal good X, okay? So let's put it like this. So what is the substitution effect? So now let me write this down. So let me actually, even if the individual were to stay on the same indifference curve, right? So even if I don't want to change the real income level of that guy, okay? On the same indifference curve, there will be a change, to equate MRS to new price ratio. So this is kind of like the pure substitution, right? Because y is not really cheaper, I'm going to substitute y for x. That's why I'm decreasing my x consumption, okay? And the income effect, of course, due to price change, real income of the consumer has changed, right? So that's why the individual is going to go to a new indifference curve, okay? To be proper, of course, remember I told you, I forgot to write, U2 is greater than U1, okay? So that's how I wrote it, okay? And basically, so we said that substitution effect is on this graph, movement from E1 to B, okay? E1 to B, or you can call this X1 minus, you can call it XB. So this much of decrease is due to substitution effect, okay? Decrease is due to, actually because it's a decrease, I should be proper, I should write this first, but you guys know that it's a decrease, okay? Is due to substitution effect, right? And we actually said that movement from B to E2, okay? So basically the decrease XB minus X1, X2 star, okay, decrease is due to income effect. And this is the total, effect is called the total effect, okay? So no big news. So this is basically, right? So this part here, someone asks you, oh, what is the effect of an increase in price? So you said that, okay, so the total effect is this guy, but I can decompose it into the substitution effect and income effect, okay? So this is going to be the case, okay? I hope it's clear because it's really important. Now, let me actually tell you, but I haven't, remember we said that it's a normal good. So let's look at here. So when there's an increase in price, right? When there's an increase in the price of X, what does substitution effect tell you? To increase or decrease your consumption of X? Decrease. What does your income effect tell you? To decrease, right? Suppose price of X decreases. Now let's think of the case price of X decreases. What do you think substitution effect would tell you? To increase your consumption, right? And then it's going to tell you, what about the income effect? Now would you feel poorer or richer when price of X decreases? Just good news, right? You would feel richer. If it's a normal good, you would like to consume more. Then you see what's going on. These effects are in different directions or in the same direction. In the same direction. So for normal goods, these effects will be in the same direction. So this is important. Okay, so let's actually have this. So here, let's say, you can always do it for a decrease in Px as well. Suppose Px increases, okay? So you guys said that for normal goods, right? You said that Px increases, substitution effect tells you decrease your optimal amount of X, right? And you said that income effect tells you you should decrease your optimal consumption of X, okay? Suppose you have an inferior good. So let's do it like this. For inferior goods. Now, what does substitution effect tell you? Suppose X is an inferior good. Suppose it's ekmek arası patates kızartması, French fries sandwich, okay? So what does that tell you? Suppose the price of French fries sandwich increases. What does substitution effect tell you? To decrease French fries sandwich. So just keep in your mind that substitution effect has nothing to do with good being normal or inferior. Remember, it had something to do with a change in income. In substitution effect, remember, we made sure that there is no change in real income, right? So the guy is still on U2, okay? But we made sure that there is no change in real income. So substitution effect, when the price of one good increases, substitution effect would always tell you decrease the consumption of that good, okay? Because that good is now relatively more expensive, consume less of it, okay? Substitution effect, for instance, in this case, would always be negative, okay? Now we actually say that for inferior goods, as you said that, oh hocam, substitution effect tells us that we should decrease our ekmek arası patates kızartması consumption, okay? French fries sandwich consumption. What does income effect tell you? Income effect tells you that you're poorer now, your income is less, but this is an inferior good. You're poorer, you should consume more ekmek arası patates kızartması, right? French fries sandwich. So it tells you to increase your consumption of X. Now what's going to happen? What is going to, how do you think the total effect would look like? Here, total effect, right? So it's going to tell you total effect would also mean that X will decrease. But what about this case? So it's going to? It depends, right? It depends which effect is larger, okay? So you see, we don't know. So whatever you said was correct, right? Because it depends which effect is larger, right? In absolute terms, of course, right? So most of the time, you'll see that substitution effect dominates, is larger than income effect, okay? Most of the time, for most of the inferior goods, okay, we actually have substitution effect is larger than the income effect, okay? Then what's going to happen? Total effect would tell you to decrease the consumption of X. Then what does this mean? This is like exactly as we talked before. Px increases, you end up decreasing your consumption of X. This is called law of demand, right? This is what they teach you in any introductory econ class, okay? So when price of a good increases, consumption of that good should decrease. But now, we're no longer in 101, right? So now we can actually come up with these special and weird cases. You see that for most of the inferior goods, this is the case. But for some, if income effect is greater than substitution effect, then what's going to happen? So this is case one. For most of the case, we have this. But this could be the other case where we have income effect greater than substitution effect. Then it's going to tell you if this is more than this guy, it tells you to increase your consumption, right? Which means that when price of X increases, you're going to increase your consumption of X, which is weird. So these type of goods, these type of inferior goods, they have a special name, okay, which is giffen, right? So they're called giffen goods, okay? So these, you see that they're inferior goods, but they're special inferior goods. So these goods are called giffen goods, okay? So you see that here for both of these cases, so for this one, Okay, so when this is the case, del x star del pi is positive, okay, here. Here it's also del x star I del pi is positive, right? In this case, for normal goods, we know this is the case, right? When price increases, sorry, negative. So this is, okay? So basically it corresponds to a downward sloping demand curve, right? In this case and in this case. But only for these guys, given goods, del xi star over del pi, when price of one good increases, consumption of that good increases. Okay, so this is a special case. So let me give you an example and then I'll get to you. So usually it's very hard to find an example for given goods, but mostly the example that we could give is, have you heard anything called the Irish potato famine? Right, so actually at some point, it's like due to the only food that was available was Irish potato. Okay, and imagine. So let me give you this example. Suppose you are eating. Most of the time, you'll see that goods are goods that constitute a large share of your budget. But not is that, I have a Mercedes and that constitutes a huge share of my budget. That's not like that, because they should be an inferior good, right? So for instance, think of it like this. Suppose in these, during those times, people were eating only potato. Let's say 6 days a week they were eating potato. And one day they were able to get a little bit of meat, okay, one day. Now price of potato increases. What's going to happen? Now you have to feed yourself, and your 6 days is now you have to spend a bit more money for those 6 days. Then you might not even have enough money for meat. For that day you might also need to consume potato, okay? That's how, when price of potato increases, actually consumption, your optimal consumption of potato would increase, okay? Actually, that's what happened. So there was the famine, açlık, okay? And potato prices were increasing, and potato consumption was increasing as well, okay? So one example is what we call the Irish potato, okay? Or you can think of this as rice in the rural regions of China, okay? Yani pirinci de düşünebilirsiniz in very kırsal kesimler Çin'de. There is also when price of, because imagine that you're eating 6 days a week only rice, and then one day you had a little bit of, let's say, chicken or whatever, and then price of rice increases. The money that you spared for chicken is that you have to allocate it on those rice days, and then on the next day you would probably have only money for rice, okay? So, and then Irish potato, and let's say rice in rural regions of China. So you see that this is when the good is given, we're going to have an upward sloping demand curve, which we haven't seen. We mentioned it in Econ 101, but a demand curve would be like this. Okay, you see that I promised you that I'm going to tell you what lies behind the demand curve that we have learned, but in the end we learned that it could be upward sloping, okay, as well. So now, because you see that I can have any sort of utility function, any function that I could actually arrange. So you guys have questions? Yes. Actually, according to the example I give, you might get that feeling they might have substitutes, but it might be the case that, you cannot use that, so you should think of these goods as inferior goods, which constitute a huge share of your budget, okay? It could be, let me give the example like this, and actually, suppose you eat, let's say, 4 days rice and increases, then you would consume 5 days okay, of rice, 2 days of wheat. There could be, you know, a little bit of action going on, but the fact that rice constitutes such a huge share of your budget that you cannot actually, you know, like the effect, the income effect it's going to generate is actually huge, so you end up consuming, you know, more of that good. Okay? Yes. There is substitution effect. You see, remember, don't forget that. But it's very fine. The substitution, what you can get out of substitution is really little. Okay? Yes.
Less than equal to 0. That means that we also include 0. So when the derivative is 0, that what does it imply?
It means that the good is not responsive to the optimal consumption is not responsive to changes in price. And there is an example for that. What is it? It gives, it's a perfect good. Okay, so just say this and then you'll go. And then, oh no, don't go. So it's, okay, just take. So yeah, but your friend is actually asking, Hocam, what happens if this is 0? What does that mean? Yes, the quiz will be very short. So it's no. It's so. But tell me what happens when this is 0. When this derivative, when price of X increases, it doesn't change my demand. What type of goods they are, we'll learn. But some of your friends might know perfectly. Inelastic. Right? Suppose you have diabetes, şeker hastasısınız. So you have to use certain amount of insulin, right? Whatever the price of insulin, it's not going to matter. It's a fixed amount that you need to take every day. Okay? So don't go. Take out a piece of paper and then I'll write down the question.